Hi, my name is Ashley, and today I want to talk to you about forgiveness. Why should we forgive? And if we forgive somebody who has done something so awful, so horrendous to us, does this mean that this person deserves this kind of grace? But before I get into that, let me just tell you a quick story. I have a son, and uh, let's say a year or two ago, we found a couple of caterpillars in our garden. Um, it was really exciting, really all the buzz in our house for a good while, a good couple of weeks. We found a few really tiny ones and a couple of more sort of medium sized, kind of fatter ones. So it was really exciting. It was all about feeding them, getting the leaves, the right kind of leaves, getting the leaves all moist, putting them into the little container that they were living in, making sure they have enough air, watching them grow every day, going as far as giving them names. Was really, really exciting. Um, and then a little while later, one of the caterpillars that my son was the most excited about was for the monarch butterfly. That's his favorite. And so the little monarch caterpillar started getting these little white things on its skin. It looked a little weird. Um, and these white things, after a moment or so, started to sort of fall off of its skin. We didn't quite know what it was. So we researched it a little just to find that it was a parasoid wasp that had um, stung the skin of the caterpillar when it was a little smaller, and it had laid its eggs inside of the caterpillar. And long story short, we learned that this is actually quite a cruel sort of death sentence for this little worm, because what would happen is that these larvae would hatch and they would start feeding off this host, this live host. And of course, it has to be this live host for these larvae to get the best possible meal or the best possible nutrients. And they would eat the caterpillar from the inside. They would start eating at it, its flesh and so on. And they would leave the most vital organs for the end, right at the end, so that they have a fresh meal for as long as possible. Um, and this, of course, is a terribly, terribly cruel way to die for this little worm. And it's a really sad ending to the life of something that would have been a beautiful butterfly. Of course, there were some others that did survive that never had these parasoid wasps leave their larvae inside of them. So that was really exciting to have these little worms grow and become all big and fat and eventually make their beautiful cocoons. And out of there, we found these gorgeous butterflies that were released. And it was really quite an exciting time. But do you realize that if you have been offended, this hurt that comes into you is kind of like this wasp, the parasoid wasp, that leaves the sting on the inside of you. And at first, we go about our lives, we go about our business, and we don't really pay much attention to it. And it kind of starts to grow, kind of like a little bit of resentment here, a little bit of anger there, a little bit of bitterness starts creeping in after some time. And before you know it, it becomes something that seems to sort of eat you from the inside out. Very similar to these parasoid wasps that eat these beautiful little caterpillars live in the cruelest way. Let me share my point with another illustration. So I've got two of my son's toys. I've got two toys with me, two little plushies. Let's say that this one is called Seal. Okay, so that's his name, Seal. And this little guy is called Owl. Okay. Now, let's say that Seal does something to his friend. They're friends, and Seal does something to his friend. Maybe let me use a simple illustration. So let's say that Seal breaks Owl's favorite toy, okay? And Owl is really upset about it. And so Seal sort of kind of says sorry, doesn't say sorry, doesn't really matter. But Seal walks away, goes about his business, starts doing all kinds of normal Seal things, moves on with his life. But Owl has not let it go because it was his favorite toy, or her favorite toy. In this case, it's a girl dog. So Owl ends up kind of holding on to Seal. And as Seal goes about his business, doing all kinds of Seal things, maybe getting some fish with his friends, going for a swim in the ocean, what kind of things do seals do? play all kinds of seal games with his friends. He goes about his business, right? And all the while not realizing that Al has still got a grudge. In most cases, Seal probably wouldn't even care that Al is still holding a grudge. But Al, in the meantime, has become bitter, angry, frustrated, resentful, and so Al just cannot let it go. Al is consumed with what Seal has done, and Seal is completely oblivious. Unforgiveness is very similar to my simple child story. You could think of it this way. You could think of these parasitic or parasitoid larvae, plural, that have entered this caterpillar and have started to eat it from the inside out. You could almost compare this like a cancer that starts to grow on the inside of a person. At first, it's something really small. You don't even really realize it. It's a couple of cancer cells that sort of develop, and nobody really knows. After a while, it gets a little bigger. A couple of cells form together, becomes a little bigger, maybe becomes a lump after some time. Before you know it, you've got something that is spreading, and it's spreading on the inside of you. It's starting to sort of eat at you on the inside, right? It's sort of this silent enemy that you may or may not even know about yet. And as it continues to grow, like a cancer, it sort of starts to affect your organs. After some time, it becomes just bigger and bigger. And it can get to a point where it starts to spill over. It can start to affect everybody around you. Let me give you another illustration that could help with this point. Not forgiving. Remember, forgiveness has very little to do with Seal, believe it or not, in my child story. It has almost actually nothing to do with Seal. It has everything to do with Al, who can't let go. With valid reasons, of course. None of us hold on to unforgiveness because we are trying to forgive something petty. We hold on to it because we're trying to forgive something, frankly, unforgivable. So Al has still got this unforgiveness. And imagine that Al wants to give poison to Seal. It's an extreme example, but imagine that Al wants to give poison to Seal. And Al ends up drinking the poison herself, because that's what unforgiveness is like. It's like giving poison to somebody, or drinking poison yourself and hoping that somebody else will die. That's what Al is doing. Al is, in effect, dying from all of this bitterness and this anger and this frustration. And it can get to a point, as some of you may know, where it starts to affect your health, your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health. It really starts to take over if we don't deal with this unforgiveness. And the root, of course, is this pain that we're carrying. So unforgiveness really is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to have the effects of it. Let me explain it to you this way. As I said to you, that unforgiveness has very little, in fact, actually nothing to do with the person that you are forgiving. It has everything to do with you. Imagine that the person who has wronged you owes you a debt, obviously. They've done something to you that owe you something, right? And unforgiveness is like saying that I release this person of this debt that they owed me. I say that everything is paid up in full. It's all in the clear. That's more what forgiveness is like. I'd love to share another story with you. Something that brought me a bit of perspective. I had a good couple of truly awful things to forgive myself, but many years ago, when I was still sort of shortly out of school, I was visiting one of my friends, a woman. She was a young woman herself. She was living on her own. And when I got to a place, we were drinking some coffee, and she shared something with me that she was really quite upset about, deeply, deeply upset about. And she told me a story about a little boy that had sort of crossed her path, and the circumstances of this child and the circumstances of her interaction with this child really, really upset her. So what had happened is She was driving a car on a route that she took often, and she saw this mom, sort of like a seemed to be a homeless person, with a little boy, maybe homeless, maybe really just not well off at all, maybe just had fallen on some hard times. But nonetheless, this woman was begging at the traffic light. It wasn't her that was begging though. It was her little boy who was maybe 3 years old, four maximum, if that. Um, and so she saw them at the traffic light a few days in a row, and it really bothered her because she had, um, I don't know if she had noticed them before or if the little boy was a new addition or whatever the case was, but she saw this little child, raggedy clothes, filthy, looked like he hasn't seen a bath in a really long time. He seemed to be quite sort of skinny, so she assumed that maybe he didn't have a lot to eat, didn't have any shoes, tiny little feet. And so this she noticed that this child had to be the one who was begging at the traffic light. His mom sent him while she would stay on the side of the road. She would send this little boy into this road at the traffic light to beg from the cars that had stopped there, obviously. And this really upset her. It deeply upset her. And my friend's heart is really, really big, and so she often does things without truly thinking them through. And she went to this mom. She was so upset, um, had so much empathy for this little child. And so she went to the mother. She pulled off on the side of the road. She went to the mother. And she said to her, she asked her if she could take the little boy to her house. She would bath him, give him a clean set of clothes, give him a nice fresh meal. It would take an hour and a half max, and then she would bring him back. And so the mother didn't really seem to focus too much on what she was saying, or she didn't seem to be overly interested, but she said that it was fine. Not necessarily the wisest decision my friend has ever made, but nonetheless, her heart was in a good place. And so she took this little boy to her apartment. She got him in a bath. First off, this child freaked out about the water. It was as though he had maybe never been bathed before, or if he really wasn't used to it at all. Um, and so this was kind of a moment that was a bit too much for him, and she obviously had a lot of compassion for the fact that he's probably scared and a bit overwhelmed, and so she kind of shortened the bath, did sort of more of a quick version, sort of tapped him down, pat him down, and then she had actually bought clothes for him. She asked the mom when to buy clothes and then went to go fetch the child. So she put on these new clothes, new shoes, on this little homie, and then she of course gave him a fresh meal, a nice cooked healthy meal with a bit of treats, a little bit of candy. And it was as though she described that it was as though this child wasn't really accustomed to sort of more fancy, more decent kind of food, because he was a little bit disinterested in some of the things on the plate, as though he didn't quite know what to do with them, or he wasn't quite sure about them. But of course, he loved the few candies that she had given him as well. So she got him all dressed up, got him all fed, put his old clothes in a plastic bag, and she dropped him off at his mom's. But when she got to the mom the mom saw him, or aunt, or whoever the caregiver was. We assumed that it was his mother. She was quite upset by the condition of this child because he looked like he didn't need to be there. And so she immediately got him dressed back into his old clothes. No shoes, raggedy, torn, dirty, damaged clothes. And so she had him dressed back in that. And my friend's heart just sank at the situation of this young, not even school-age child's life. And she, of course, was sitting with me, venting about it. We were drinking coffee, and she was deeply, deeply upset about this. And I was very thankful for hearing this story. I was overwhelmed with emotion for this child as she was. But I was grateful for the fact that I could get some insight into something that I may have missed completely otherwise. When I was sitting at my friend's place, I had a good piece of forgiving to do myself. And it was some forgiving that I had to do towards a stranger, really, somebody that I had never met before, wronged me, and I'd never seen that person again. But of course, that incident, that whole interaction, and left its mark. And I was sitting there with quite a bit of unforgiveness, bitterness, a bit of anger, trying to make sense of what had happened to me as well. And then I hear the story about this child who starts his life in such a less than ideal way. And I couldn't help but wonder if the person who had wronged me hadn't started his life in a similar way. And so I was thankful for that story, even though it is a truly awful story. And unfortunately, it is a reality for a lot of very young children. Their situation might not be as extreme in terms of poverty necessarily, although there are many children, especially in my country, who have the same situation. But I imagine that the person who had wronged me may have had a similar story, or that his background may have been different. Um, same kind of level of challenge, but different types of challenges, which may have led him to making the decisions that he made. It didn't excuse anything, but it was helpful for me to get a perspective, because I could see him as a person, which I couldn't really do before. Before that, he was a monster. And I share the story with a purpose. I'm not sharing this story because I want you to just sort of let this person get away with whatever they've done, but because getting that kind of perspective sometimes is very helpful. Understanding that you don't know where this person comes from, or what their background was, or what led them to the decisions that they make, how wrong they are. It helps with a bit of insight. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is sometimes in my little story about CL and L, I sometimes share the story with some of my students, and I've told the story to my son as well from a very young age. You may find that somebody does something. Let me use an example from the perspective of a child again. So you may find that one friend is sort of always nasty, always bossy, always demanding, always wants to look for ways to put others down, always grabbing things, breaking other people's things. That's just a silly illustration, but I think you understand my point, is that not everybody behaves in good ways. And so my son would come to me, and some of my students, my younger students, sometimes would come to me as well, and they would, sort of not understand why somebody is ugly to them for no good reason. And with some of them, I can go into this conversation in more depth, and others just sort of on the surface. But nonetheless, it goes something like this. I kind of explain, let me use my son as an example. So I explain that in our hearts, we have sort of like a bank, like a money bank. And sometimes it happens that it works this way. So every time that your mom gives you a hug, it's sort of like a deposit into your love bank. Or every time that your teacher tells you that you're really good at art, it's a deposit into your love bank. Or if a friend tells you that you're really good at soccer, it's a deposit into your love bank. And so your love bank grows. But for some friends, that love bank doesn't get filled up with good things. And so their love bank is quite empty. It's, of course, very similar for adults. People who are whole don't behave in the ways that our offenders behave. And it's helpful to understand that they are acting from a point of being quite empty themselves. It doesn't excuse what they've done in any shape or form. This is what it does not do. It does not say that it's okay. It does not say that if I let this go, that you're off the hook. It doesn't say that I need to be reconciled with you, because I don't. I can forgive you without ever having to see you again. Reconciliation and forgiveness is not the same thing. And if you forgive somebody, it doesn't mean that your pain is any less significant. It doesn't mean that you have been wronged any less. It doesn't mean that it doesn't matter, because it does. What it means is that I am big enough to think about myself and about the fact that I don't want this cancer to eat me from the inside out and spill over into my relationships anymore. I don't want this parasite larva to eat me from the inside and only just leave my vital organs for the end. I don't want any of that. I want to live a full life. I want to get to the point where I can be the full caterpillar, fully grown, and eventually have my full life cycle in terms of joy and peace and happiness and being released of these things that are holding us captive, being loosed from these chains. And so I am big enough to think about what's best for me. And I'm big enough to say that even though you owe me a debt, I'm going to write it off. Because it's not good for me to hold on to what you did to me. So forgiveness may not be exactly what you think it is. And it may not be this get out of free jail card that we often assume that it is. It has a lot more to do with what's good for you and holding on to it, being chained to this person, having your heart entangled is not good for you. So we have to let it go. And we let it go by forgiving. It doesn't mean that you're going to say, Jesus, I forgive so and so for what they've done to me in your name once. It may happen depending on how deep the wound is, how deep the offense is, how close that person is to you or was to you. It may happen that you might need to do it many, many times before you really get a full release. But what you cannot do is not forgive. In the end, it'll be a suicide mission for you. Your heart will become ensnared. Your brain will be consumed by it. You will be so full of your love bank may end up having some good stuff in it, but it can have so much bad in it, anger, resentment, bitterness, frustration, that it ends up consuming the love that is in your love bank, and it may become so overflowing or so overfilled that it spills out onto those who love you the most. And this is what often happens. If you leave unforgiveness unchecked long enough, it transfers into an enormous amount of bitterness that starts affecting everything that's good in you and everything that's good in your life. So when you release, it has very little to do with the other person. Even though I've shared a few ideas about some insight that may be helpful for some of you, for others of you, couldn't care less what their deal is. They hurt me. Fair enough, you can see it that way too. I share this not to make it better or not to make it any less of an offense. I share this because sometimes insight is helpful. Here's the other thing that I wanted to share with you. In many cases, I almost want to say all cases. Let me say in all cases, but I could be wrong. Let's say many cases. In many cases, what has been done to you has nothing to do with you. Sorry, what? Let me put it to you a different way. If you had, for example, if you had a parent who was truly awful, and they've done a lot of things that was really not ideal. Imagine that you had been born a different child. Okay, just bear with me for a second. So I was born a little blonde girl with blue eyes. Okay. Now if I imagine that I had been born a little girl with green eyes and brown hair. Or I had been born, let's take it a step further, I'd been born a little boy with brown eyes and red hair. Maybe a whole bunch of freckles, just to be stereotypical. Imagine that, right? I realize that in my analogy, it wouldn't have made a difference for the offender. Their behavior would have been exactly the same. Because it had nothing to do with the person who was being wronged. And it had everything to do with the person who was doing the wronging. Because they don't know how to do better, or they know how to do better and they don't care. Or because they have a very empty love bank, not saying that makes it right. Or they have some enormously tough background of their own and they probably don't have the maturity to deal with it in the correct way. Let me add something here. For somebody, this might mean something. It's a lot easier to forgive somebody if you can see them at their maturity age. So we have some Haridas that are joining us on this one. Got a couple of amens in the background. Okay, so let me say that again. It's a lot easier to forgive somebody if you can see them at their maturity age. And let's be honest, people who behave in selfish ways, arrogant ways, aggressive ways, self-centered ways are generally not very mature people. People who have relational issues constantly, who cannot get along with anybody, who's always got some kind of deal, some kind of chip on their shoulders, very often they don't have the maturity to deal with things differently. So let's add a measure of immaturity, most likely to your offender as well. If you can see them at their maturity age, maybe 30 years old, acting like a 16-year-old, for example, if you can see that, it makes it easier to forgive. And of course, it adds to the fact that really it's their problem. Their behavior, their actions, it has everything to do with them and nothing or very little to do with me. I may have just hit a little nerve, or I might have just triggered something because I have a specific type of personality, or I do things a specific way, or I try to do things in a more correct way, which sort of irritates them. But it had nothing to do with me, really. It had everything to do with the offender. For some of you, this is going to be very insightful. Then I wanted to share another idea with you. So wait, let me just back up for a second. So I want you to close your eyes just for one moment. Imagine the person that you are. Imagine when you came into this world, right? Maybe you have blonde hair, blue eyes like I did when I came into this world. Maybe you have brown hair, blue eyes, whatever. It could have nothing to do with your looks, your physical features. It probably has a lot more to do with your personality type, your characteristics, your talents, the way you carry yourself, the way you hold yourself, your level of endurance, etc. So if you had been anybody else, do you realize they probably would have done exactly the same thing? For somebody, that's going to be helpful. Then I wanted you to also get this picture, okay? Do you realize that there is nothing you are dealing with that Jesus doesn't understand? If you've been rejected, so has he. If you've been insulted, so has he. If you've been constantly tested, so has he. If you've been betrayed, you say it, so has he. If you've been assaulted, so has he. If you've been treated like a criminal when you've done nothing wrong, say it, so has he. If you've been, could be any number of things, anything that you are experiencing, anything that has been done to you, in principle, in general, maybe not the exact same situation, maybe not the exact same offense, maybe not the exact same kind of attack, the exact same kind of betrayal. In his case, it was one of his disciples, one of his closest friends, somebody in his inner circle. For you, it may be your spouse, it may be a family member, but you get the point that I'm making. There is nothing that you are going through that he doesn't understand. So you might not be quite as alone as you think you are. This helps us to understand that he is not a distant God. God is not a distant God. So you're dealing with all of this stuff. He let this happen to you, which is an argument so many of us have. And for that, I would encourage you to watch one of my previous videos where I asked the question, why not me? Because it can also help with some insight to sort of free yourself from that kind of bondage. But you may feel that he's distant. He doesn't care. He's abandoned you. He didn't want you. You're as unwanted to him as maybe you were to whoever. There are lots of different things that we could assume about God. But what is not true is that he is distant, even though it may seem that way. Now, Do you understand that the same Jesus who went through the same personal issues that you go through, the same kind of traumatic experiences that you are experiencing, do you realize that he came to this earth for you personally? He's not distant. He lived a life on this earth, had a ministry, had so many teachings recorded about him for you personally. He went to hell, defeated the grave for you personally. Of course, this means that he was crucified. For everybody else? No. For you personally. There is nothing distant about our Savior. Everything about him is personal. And everything that you are dealing with is personal for him, even if you may not believe it right now. And with that, I leave the thought that it is so personal for him that he made a way for you to have these chains ripped off of your heart. And he did that for you personally. He's not a distant God. I hope some of these insights are helpful for somebody. A couple of ideas, some things you may want to think about. Maybe you've got some other ideas of your own that could be very helpful, some stories of your own, some things that you've heard, some testimonies. And of course, those are always welcome. You can put them in the comments if you'd like. But the long and short of it is that we do not want to have this parazoid wasp larvae life. We have had enough taken from us. Remember also that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Let me add to this that you may not realize that all of this was a plan that somebody had for you, and it had nothing to do with people. You have Jesus on your side, but that also means that you have somebody not on your side who has an enormous plan for you. And it may even be that Satan has gone to Jesus and asked for you. So there's a plan. There's a whole plan behind it. So you may be looking at this from a personal perspective, from a human perspective, with all of these limited ideas, but there's an enormous amount of context that you may not see yet. But at the end of it all, we need to get our hearts free from this parasite that comes into our hearts and steals from us because it has taken enough. And so, I leave you with this. May you release the person who has wronged you from their debt. Be reconciled if you'd like. You don't have to. Be free from what they have done to you. Have these chains loosed from your heart. Get free. Like the caterpillar, do you know that there is a way for a gardener to save a caterpillar once it has been infected with these little parasites? May Jesus be the gardener who takes all of these tiny little larvae out of your body and finds a way to get you free, released, to your growing to your full potential, your full caterpillar size, and may you eventually become the beautiful butterfly that he has designed you to be. Till next time, goodbye.